for you. Did you guys make any progress yet on your exams?
So I have words on paper, well, on computer. So I'm just trying to get an outline. So yeah, this was my first uh, writing. Actually, I did not write any last night. So I tried to get at least a start on 9, 10, and 11.
Okay.
So I'm out of the gates.
Right. All right. There's
Yeah.
nothing bad for that. There's nothing bad for that. James, I saw you shaking your head, so I got what you meant by that. So, hey, this is really a time for you guys or for anyone else who joins us. Again, we'll be as long as you need to be. We'll be as short as you guys want. James, I appreciate you sending me the email. I'll share with you in the chat the two main books that people use to just understand how do the different views of Christian care work together. This first one here is edited by Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson, at the time of the editing, and for a while, was a professor at Southern Seminary of psychology. Southern Seminary eventually moved away from psychology to biblical counseling. He was Christian psychology, so he's no longer there. But that book will discuss the various views at a philosophical level, meaning it's not going to have case engagement. It's trying to explain from the person's position what this movement is about, and then other guys get to critique it, sort of like a dialogue. Now, I will say this, David Powlison, before he went to be with the Lord, wrote on biblical counseling. I do not think he did a good job. David Powlison normally is excellent. I believe his arguments in this book are a bit convoluted and confusing, but nonetheless, they're in there. The other one is edited by, let's see here, Grego. For some reason, I can't pull it up on Amazon. Christian Counseling, Grego. Oh, there it is. Okay. So here's the other one. This one doesn't focus as much on the philosophical underpinnings of the various movements. Rather, it focuses, how does this play out? And what they do is they use a particular case where a person named Jake is struggling. They walk through a case study that's pretty elaborate, and then each discipline has an opportunity to spell out their interpretation of the problem and how they would go about counseling. From a biblical counseling perspective, Stuart Scott writes, and I think he does a phenomenal job. And so if you're just wanting to see the philosophical differences, how does it play out? How does it work? Then that's a great resource for you. And then because you asked specifically about Christian psychology, I'll share one that I recently read that I actually liked. I liked his scholarship. I liked his approach. I liked a lot of things. But then ultimately, when you get to the last chapter, the last two chapters, everything starts going haywire. So you could read the book and you can honestly read the book and think, man, this is good stuff. I mean, he's exegeting the text, and he actually does it around the issue of worry and fear. And his main proposition in the beginning of the book, he argues with Matthew 6, when Jesus says, do not fear, biblical counseling would interpret that as an imperative, right? Christ is calling for his children not to be fearful people. In fact, it's written in the Greek as an imperative for Bill there, who had his 40 years of Greek. Rather, what he'll argue is these...
3 years, 40 years ago.
Yeah. Rather, he'll try to get out of those Greek constructions of imperatives and say that Jesus isn't ordering anything. He never orders an emotional state. Rather, he's pointing to the frivolity of fear and worry. He's encouraging his his people not to worry. And so he'll say things like, to place the burden of emotional duty on the shoulders of people adds iniquity to their injuries. Well, I agree that people are sufferers and sinners, but that doesn't mean we don't encourage them, exhort them to choose not to fear, not to worry. And so my point is, if you want to see a larger example of how does this play out, this is an excellent resource. I mean, I could get coffee with this guy. I'm going to see him in heaven. But he's a Christian psychologist, not by training, but he takes the position of one. So he's not a psychologist, but he's writing from the Christian psychology perspective. Eric Johnson actually writes and helps him formulate some of these thoughts. Kevin Van Hooser, who is has nothing to do with the counseling world, has everything to do with the hermeneutics world, actually commends him for his work and it writes the foreword. So it just shows you there's a complicated web of relationships there, and biblical counseling is definitely the underdog, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that we have the training videos from Brad Bigney on soul care and stuff, and he, in one of them, he talked, or maybe it was one of the sessions in one of the prior tracks, everything kind of blends together in my head sometimes, but he gave kind of his path to where he is involved in biblical counseling. And I mean, he was quite powerfully involved in psychology, had his own practice and stuff. So I mean, that was helpful, as he basically, I guess he would summarize, I didn't have anything to really give them in that whole matter of psychology. But when Christ becomes a part of it, you know, it's often the heart. So if you have a psychologist that practices certain things, but then takes it back to the heart and the repentance and stuff like that, then yeah, it's just trying. There's a woman in our church who is trained through a university called Eastern University, and we get into these debates every now and again over the role of psychology in counseling, therapeutic practice and stuff. And I've been trying to woo her more and more, but when she has a chance, she really will lay the scriptures out in front of one of her clients, you know. So it's just like, yeah, it's that tightrope almost of walking between two worlds. So
yep, and that's
that's why I'm asking those things.
You said Brad Bigney. I think you meant Garrett Higbee.
Yeah, Garrett Higbee. I can't even keep the names right. My wife laughs. I can't remember words of songs or anything. So.
Yep. And I don't view these people as my enemies. I just view them as wrong.
Yeah.
You know, because you even said something incredibly revealing there. When she has the chance, you just think about what that means. And personally, I'm just imagine if you said to the pastor, when you get the opportunity, choose to preach the gospel to people.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Let me clarify that. She works for a psychologist, and in the practice, the psychologist is quote unquote Christian, has a Christian worldview, but in her practice, you know, with the clients, not when she's in our context. When she's in our context, it's everything about Christ. So yep. Sorry about that misinformation.
Well, no, I think it's a very common experience that these good people have, where they may have incredibly deep faith in Christ, but they're trying to help people apart from Christ. And one of the commitments of biblical counseling is that isn't possible. You know, I might be able to teach you, you know, certain fruit activities, right? I might teach you the 4 rules of communication without ever calling them the 4 rules of a communication from Ephesians 4. But we all know that without a heart change, that apple that was nailed to that tree is going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that person is going to be spending so much time managing their fruit, trying to nail those apples up, trying to pluck those oranges off that tree. They're going to spend so much time, and the ultimate problem of their salvation will not have changed, and the earthly problems of their hearts will never have changed. And so the commitment in biblical counseling is we don't want anything to do with giving people false hope. That somehow you can change, somehow you can be better apart from Christ and his sufficient word. And so, I mean, Christian psychology, which tries to chart its own psychology. So it's not trying to integrate necessarily secular methods with the Bible. Although, let's be honest, it's a bit like the Catholic Church. When the Pope says something and the Bible says something, in theory, they're equal. They're equally authoritative. Right. But which one always loses? The Bible always loses to the Pope. And what always loses in integration is the Bible. And so, I commend people for trying to do it. I think that ultimately they're wrong. They're confused. They're great people. They're intelligent people. They love the people that are before them. But it's obviously a totally different worldview and a totally different goals that we're trying to make. And we're unapologetic about it. Now, that being said, would I panic if a church member went to a Christian psychologist? No. I would be waiting for them to come to me eventually. So yeah, there's a lot to be done there, and you can obviously turn her on to Garrett Higbee's items. What I've seen is just helpful is them being involved in the counseling process with biblical counselors, seeing the teaching. It actually can work on their hearts a bit, just like it did with Garrett Higbee. Sometimes it just takes the experience to change somebody. But great work, and I hope she sees the light one day. And if not, we're still going to see her in heaven.
We're team members.
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking that time, but I want to hog all the time.
Well, that's fine. There's only the three of you. So again, we don't mandate you got into these, so some folks may say, look, you're in my lunch hour, or I listened to that guy before. He had nothing intelligent to say. That's all fine and dandy. There will be no offense here.
Yeah, I do have a question, or maybe two.
Sure.
So question 9, which you just went over, does not have a specific invitation to address the counseling implications, and yet you did in your talk. Would that be good to assume that that's desired every time, or only if it's stated?
Yeah, so you don't have to do it if it's not stated. You won't get it wrong. But one of the reasons that we'll do that, and I'll do that, is to help you guys understand, why are we even talking about this? Like, sometimes the questions, when they don't ask for implications, you, the person writing the exam, may think, why am I answering this? So you don't have to, but I will try to generally tie it back to why is this significant? So obviously, understanding the Trinity is significant. We don't need to worry too much about telling you that. Some of these other ones, like dichotomy versus trichotomy, why is it significant? It's not necessarily part of the question, but you guys should understand the significance behind the question.
Yeah. And then along with that, there's an assumption, I'm guessing, that the counselees are all professing believers, or is there a place for, whether it's a couple and one's a believer, one's not, or
there will be, on the counseling exam, you will get to Tim and Emily. And the first question, as it relates to Tim and Emily, after you read through their case report, is how will you approach them, as believers or unbelievers? So yeah, you will get into that nuanced conversation later in the counseling exam, as you flesh out some of this theology.
Okay, because I found myself going there. It's like, well, if they're a believer, then you go this way. If they're not, then you have to kind of camp out right there.
Exactly. And you can feel free to do that if your mind wants to take you that direction. You're not going to be bad, but we will specifically ask for that when it's important. And it'll become most important when we get to the actual counseling questions, where how do I do this case?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Come on, guys.
Belinda,
What's that, Bill?
I just inviting Belinda. It's her turn.
Yeah, hey, that's okay. Or she may not need anything, may not want anything. That's totally fine. No pressure there.
I just joined a few minutes late.
Oh,
So just
that's
catching the
okay.
last end of this.
We're just talking a little bit about Christian psychology and then just some specifics. I don't usually have because it's a question and answer time. I don't have a structure for this. There's not like here's the 50 most common questions. We kind of worked through those already. So.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing I would ask is I find myself, at this point, leaning heavily on the notes, and yet I don't want to get dinged for,
You won't.
plagiarizing.
You will not. All you have to do is when you're stealing something, just put a little footnote in there. What I tell folks is there's really two options. You can either, as you're going through your exam on the particular questions where you steal, just put a footnote, these answers were in part informed by Faith Biblical Counseling Ministries Track 5, or you can just put a disclaimer at the beginning of your exam, all questions were informed by this, and that's not a big problem. The other thing I tell the folks who go through this is you are more than welcome to request me as a grader for ACBC. So, we're obviously going to, over the next 3 months, we're going to build a relationship. And then normally the process, how it works is ACBC will randomly assign you a grader. So you will never know this person. You probably won't even meet them. I'm not saying you have to, you're welcome to request me. When it comes to picking a fellow, that's a bit different. You're the one who's choosing the fellow. Obviously, they're going to have to agree to take you. That's a bit different of a process. The grader is random. What I usually tell folks in Track 5 here is you are more than welcome to request me as a grader. I try to turn the exams around really quick. ACBC requires they be turned around in a month. I try to turn them around in a week, just because I know you guys. If you're at the point of turning them in, then let's do it. So
Great, that's helpful.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
I think I'm good.
Well, then I'll talk about the next. You guys are going to watch Christology towards the end of the day here. You got lunch, you got some break and stuff like that. I'm giving you a couple of things. The first part that you're going to hear Rob Green talk about is just a general overview. So it's not going to be on the particular questions. He's just going to cover some essential parts of the core Christological questions, which is Jesus is the center of Christianity and discipleship is about helping people become Christ-likeness. And I think it's just an important part to make sure that it's coursing through your questions. Now, question 12, describing the dual natures of Christ, divine and fully human, we give you plenty. It's basically, you just have to argue the point, what is it and why is it essential? And it's a pretty straightforward thing. Question 13 is provide an explanation of a biblical basis for the doctrine of substitutionary penal atonement, explaining the implications over human guilt. Relate your understanding of this concept to guilt. Now, the reason they're asking in that last question, relate your understanding of this concept to guilt, is the question of people, quote unquote, feeling guilty. We've all experienced this. We've all talked to people who say, I feel guilty. In fact, I was just dealing with this the other day in a counseling situation where a gentleman's wife was killed in a tragic car accident and he survived. And he felt guilty. Now, I couldn't minimize that feeling of guilt, but I had to help him understand guilt is a judicial thing. So why is ACBC asking you that? Is because you're going to, in counseling, have people who are going through the emotional experience of guilt, and yet they are not guilty according to the law, or maybe they are guilty, and we need to discover how is it that they are guilty. Does that make sense, guys? So that's what they're asking for when they say your understanding of guilt. It's really getting down to the question of people experiencing false guilt, or what are they actually guilty of. And then question 17, the role of repentance. That one's pretty straightforward. I don't think there's too much to say on that particular question. It's in my opinion, most folks don't really struggle too much with that question. And then there is question 20, the synergistic nature of sanctification. I will tell you this. I generally mark people wrong who don't have Philippians 2:13 in there. Work out your salvation, for it's God who works in you. Right? That is the just ideal passage to explain Philippians 2:12 and 13, the ideal passage to explain this. And so, we have to build the argument on explaining, God is working in us. There is a command for human effort. How do these things come together? If you don't have Philippians 2:12 through 13, you're probably going to get that question wrong. There are other passages, but this one says it so clearly, so succinctly, so obviously, that you should have it in there. So that's just a couple of notes to keep track of for the upcoming questions that you guys will be going through with Rob. Anything else, guys, we should cover? We got time.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm okay for now. Thank you.
How it'll work is, you guys will go to lunch or do whatever, and then you have time to work on your exam again today. You guys obviously can work on it. Then we get together in a month, on the second one. Anybody here going to the ACBC conference this year? Because we'll be doing that right on the heels of that particular conference.
I won't be.
That's fine. So I'll be breezing back into
I'll be
town on
there.
Thursday. Oh, great, Belinda. Well, hey, if you see me walking around, feel free to come say hi and introduce yourself. And but we'll be coming back into town on Thursday, and then we'll do this on Friday. And hopefully you guys will have made significant progress. One of the nice things about this format is, opposed to our week-long in-person format, is there's just no way to keep up with everything that's going on. You're writing, but we're, obviously we're pacing the lectures too fast for your writing. You guys have it almost better in the sense that, okay, we did a lot of teaching, a lot of questions, and now you got a month. And so, we've almost provided you with a level of structure to keep you on pace. And so the reality is you guys could be done shortly after, at least within a month of the ending of the third. You guys could be done by the end of the calendar. And so I encourage you guys, like I said yesterday, find a system, whether it's check boxes, whatever it is, keep yourself on pace. I have noticed when people let this drag out, they just don't do it. I've got one gentleman, I graded his exam back in January. He hasn't finished it. He's never going to finish it, because he had some rewrites, and they weren't even that many rewrites, but he's kind of sitting in my grader queue because it goes through the website. And I'm just thinking, this guy's never going to do it. And how sad. I mean, he worked through training. He worked through the exam process. He had a couple of rewrites. He got busy. I got it to him pretty quick. And now it's out there, and he will eventually run out of his time. Generally, ACBC says 90 days. They obviously are very gracious and allow for exceptions, but this guy will probably be required by ACBC to resubmit payment. This at some point they got to penalize you for dragging your feet. So yeah, he turned it in on 12/29. I got it back to him within a week, and that's been it. So
That's too bad.
Okay, guys. Well, I will see you in a month, and Belinda, I might see you sooner than that.
Yes.
And then if you guys end up having any questions, feel free to email me. I'll do the best I can to reply to those. Don't write me a book of questions, but if you got a question or two, feel free to do that. So
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.
Great.
Yep.
all right.
Have
Take
a good
care.
one.
Have a lovely Saturday.
All right,
Thank
bye.
See you.
too.
Bye.